Hi everyone, welcome to the session 2 on education philosophy and design thinking. I mean, how you design curriculum design. During the session yesterday, we spoke about how we can create a self-sustainable environment for a teacher and a student in a classroom so that you don't spoon feed the teacher and the student, and yet they have enough to discuss without too much of anxiety and to channelize all that discussion in a very constructive way going forward. We saw how having level-wise challenges and how giving the opportunity for the student to choose his or her own examples in the worksheet would be extremely crucial. Today, I would be taking over one concept which I discussed yesterday, which is about mixing convergence and divergence. Yesterday, we spoke about a teacher bringing in enough of convergence and enough of divergence. Divergence in the sense that there could be multiple viewpoints around the same thing. There could be multiple examples of the same thing, and multiple examples can seed richer meaning. And convergence in the sense that there could be a lot of viewpoints coming in, all of them converging and cohering into one concept becomes important. And it's not just about convergence, but convergence into the concept becomes important. We discussed that yesterday. So in today's session, we will discuss about conceptual clarity and what conceptual clarity even means. Having a rigorous definition of conceptual clarity is very important, especially when something like conceptual clarity is a very central notion to education. That is, that's an idea it's an all-pervading idea, right? I mean, no matter what you're studying or what you're teaching, your end objective in many ways is conceptual clarity. So wouldn't we want a conceptual clarity of conceptual clarity to, begin with? So what is conceptual clarity would then be an important question to ask. There are many ways of approaching this question, but there's one way which, I particularly like, and I hope to share that with you today. So Professor John Seal of MIT, who is a researcher who works on artificial intelligence, consciousness, and is also a philosopher of language. He says that language gives you conceptual apparatus. What is the role of language? The role of language is to give you conceptual apparatus. Now, let's see this with an example, rather a couple of examples. Example one, there's a little child, and that little child is shown three different trees. That little child is shown three different trees. Tree one, let's say, is a mango tree. Tree two, let's say, is a banana tree. Mango tree, banana tree. Wait, let me make life a little interesting. Tree one, the child is shown a mango tree. Tree two, the child is shown a banyan tree. And tree three, let's say the child is shown a peepal tree. The child is shown a mango tree, banana tree, peepal tree. What do you think would be the common characteristics of all these three trees?
All of them are trees. They have a trunk, they have leaves.
But what do they have in common which other trees may not have in common for these three? Mango, peepal, and banana. What is it that they have in common which other trees may not have? I mean, or let me rephrase myself. What is that they have in common which not many other trees might have in common?
I think that their seeds are big. I'm not sure. I think that the seeds are big. Are they?
Or does peepal tree have seeds? I'm not quite sure. Okay, that's a fair guess about the seeds. Any other thing? If you look at the shape of these trees, what shape do these three have?
Tall.
And most trees are tall. Is her shape similar to banana tree shape?
No.
What is that these three share in common which banana tree does not share?
Could you repeat the trees?
People, banyan, mango. I mean, one thing is they have a brown bark, which a mango tree probably doesn't. It's greenish. What about how broad are these trees?
Pretty broad.
Okay. Now I take a child and I show the child a pine tree. I show the child a mango tree. I say this is a tree. I show the child a mango tree and say this is a tree. I show the child an Ashoka tree and say this is a tree. I show the child a peepal tree and say this is a tree. Now I go and I show a pine tree and I ask the child, what is it? What do you think the child might answer me? I mean, a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old.
That is not a tree.
Okay, anybody else?
It is a Ashoka tree, like broad or is.
I said pine tree. It's a pine tree, right?
Like you mentioned Ashoka tree before, so was that broad or?
No, it's not broad. Ashoka tree is almost like pine tree. No?
Okay.
Let's take a pine tree. Even the leaves are different. The leaves are sharp, right? Would the child consider it to be a tree or would the child not consider it to be a tree?
Still consider it to be a tree.
And why?
There are many similarities since like, all of them have leaves, all of them have trunks, and it's common in all of the trees. So they would be able to recognize that this also is a tree.
Okay. Let's park this example aside for a while and let's take another example before coming back to this example. We'll take one more example and come back. The child sees a cat. The child sees a cat. The cat has got whiskers. The cat has got 4 legs. Right? The cat has got nice fur. The child shows, the mother shows the cat and says, this is a cat. The child sees 3 other cats and the mother says, this is a cat. Now the child sees a dog. Do you think the child would consider this to be a cat?
No.
The dog has got whiskers. The dog has got nice fur. The dog has got 4 legs.
I mean, if both of them look similar, then yes. Like the dog is tall and the cat is short, then the kid probably
What if
won't.
you're showing the child a Pomeranian, which is small, which looks similar to a cat?
Then they probably will consider it to be a cat.
I consider Pomeranian to be cats. It's just a joke, but yeah. So
The ears are very different and the body language is very different.
correct, but from a child's perspective,
Yeah, maybe.
a big question to ask is the child paying attention to this detail or not? Now, if the child is paying attention to this detail, then in the case of the pine tree, the child must say this is not a tree because its leaves are different.
Right.
That's where it can be a difficult turf. But what is the most amazing thing for us to observe from both the examples? A child who's only 2 years old, shown only 3 different objects, shown a 4th object, the child is labeling. What is that amazing thing we see here?
Seeing the similarities and differences and then through those understanding the others.
Okay. Anyone else?
Child is able to make connections.
Make connections, see similarities and differences. Anyone? Now, do we have to give these concepts to a child? A child by birth has this machine inside the head which can synthesize concepts. All that the child is looking for is that 2 or 3 examples which are a stimulus to synthesize the concept. The child looks at 3 trees. From the 3 trees, the child builds a concept within the mind. This, my dear friends, is the difference between a child's mind and an adult's mind. A child is a genius, and all the humans whom we consider geniuses like Shakespeare, Einstein, or Feynman, or anyone are just that preserved genius, which education system could not spoil. Now, I mean, we blame the education system, but it's the same education system which is discussing these perspectives, like how John Seale discusses in his Philosophy of Language sessions. What I'm trying to say is, we try to force feed concepts, but the way our mind works is, our mind looks at example A, example B, example C, and organically our mind synthesizes a concept. So now, if I would like to teach a strategy in a business class, what do you think would be a good approach then? Let's say I want to teach demand-supply dynamics. One way to teach demand-supply dynamics is to say, when demand increases, this happens to supply. When supply increases, this happens, and so on. But if you were to look at this genius of every child, you would ask, there's an island, and people there love fish. And unfortunately, there are only 3 fish left on the island, and there are 20 people who want the fish, and each one wants to eat 2 fish. And people can give diamonds to buy that fish. All of them have 100 diamonds each. And then there are, apart from fish, let's say there are some mangoes on the island. There are 1,000 mangoes. There are 1,000 mangoes, and let's say there are 20 people. And people like mangoes, but not so much. Which one will be more expensive?
Fish.
I mean, you get what I'm trying to do, right? Then you look at another example and you say, there's a desert, water is not available. Somebody has got water. Diamonds are to be traded for water. How many diamonds would people give for that water? Then you give one more example and say that there are different kinds of flowers, but this flower is very rare. This flower comes only once in 2 years. For which flower would people trade more diamonds? By the end of my 3 examples, what do you think a 4th grader or a 3rd grader would do?
They'll make a concept in their mind that if there's something less and more people want it, then there's more demand for it. But if there's something that's in bulk, but less people want it and they don't like it, then it won't be as expensive.
So instead of calling it demand supply, you give 3 different examples. Let the learner synthesize the concept. This is what I call the extrapolation of ideas technique. Extrapolation of ideas technique is, can I give multiple examples where the same concept is seen or same phenomenon is seen, and let the learner draw the patterns. But if the learner is going astray, you can always ask questions and let the learner come back. But on the contrary, in the education system, what we tend to do is we tend to over-explain stuff. But this is a very powerful idea which, for me, works each and every time. In deep thought, we have 6th and 7th graders picking up very technical business concepts and presenting them on stage every time. And people are like, you do magic, you do magic. I'm like, this is my magic, nothing else. The magic is in not teaching the concept. The magic is in not teaching the concept. You withhold the concept. You give 3 different examples and let people see it. The magic is in knowing that if you try to explain it to your learner, you're robbing your learner of that experience. But you put it forward before the learner and let the learner put in that labor of connecting those dots and seeing what the concept is. It may take some time, but it will be very firm, like Ambuja cement. Won't go away. The concept stays very firm. And one more very important concept here is, the more experiences you have around a concept, the concept grows in your mind. There's a lot more detail you have around that concept. And if you are asked to explain that concept, you find it very difficult to explain. You sort of intuitively know. So then if you're learning some new idea, would you want to anchor that against a new concept, or would you want to anchor that against a very old concept which you've been using for the last 10 years?
New concept.
Why?
Because then you can speculate again that if that matches my intuition, so how does it match?
Now, which concept is a deeply formed one in your mind, the new one or the old one?
Old one.
So if you anchor the new concept against a new one, you'll be able to make more sense of it. Or if you anchor against an old one, you'll be able to make more sense of it.
Against an old one.
Sorry?
Against an old one.
Old one, right? Lot of people say anchor the concepts to familiar concepts because they're easy to understand. It is not because it is easy to understand. It is because a concept which you have nurtured, see, every concept is like a seed in your head. The more dots you connect from that concept and the more experiences you have around that concept, that seed grows into a tree or a forest or something. So a new concept, if you link it to this concept, because it's a richly formed concept in your head, it becomes easier for you to handle that concept. For example, I mean, which is a concept which should be easier, which should be easy for you to handle? A concept of a dog or a concept of a mammoth?
Of a dog.
Why?
Because you have seen it in detail and you can.
Is it just because of you seeing it? How many mental associations would you have with the dog?
Could you elaborate?
Okay, tell me what all do you know about a dog? Tell me what all do you know about a dog? A dog barks.
Dog barks and
Dog bites. Then
dog is usually of blue color.
Sorry?
Brown color.
Dogs are in different colors. Yellow, brown, black, white.
I refer to usually.
Okay.
Okay, I see
What do
it.
you know about dogs? They bark, they bite.
The sense of smell is very strong.
The smell is very strong. Then very faithful. Can be taught to sit and stand.
Can be taught tricks as well.
Can be very playful.
Probably we all have a personal memory associated with a dog.
Sorry?
Probably we have a personal memory associated with a dog.
Correct. You may have several personal memories. But with a mammoth, probably you're remembering some eyes and some big tusks and all of that. But not many connections in your head. So a concept which is very old and which is familiar, there are more concepts in our head. It's like a rich forest or a rich network in our head. So the point I'm trying to make is, in a lifetime, what we try to do is we try to build a lot of concepts in our head. Concepts are like mobile apps which we install. Every concept is something installed within you. And when a mobile app spends more time, like WhatsApp spends more time, it gets bulkier, right? Gets more data and gets bulkier. So as the concept is you invoked more and more. When you invoke as in you use that concept somewhere to make sense of something, the connection gets richer and richer. And you don't use the concept, those networks fade away, right? So a lot of times what we do is, I mean, this is a big problem. I don't know how to articulate it, but it's like we tend to look at things through the factual lens. That it's about remembering things or it's about knowing things, that because you've got more knowledge, you're able to do things. But on the contrary, we don't excel at things because of our knowledge or because of our factual recall. We excel at things because of our conceptual understanding. That is, we recognize certain patterns, and what a concept does is a concept helps us invoke some past experiences which are relevant to the current situation and use the learning of the past experiences into this current situation. Even if the past experiences are not directly the same as this experience, you are able to find a pattern and connect, and that is what is conceptual understanding. So now if you're bringing a concept, like let's say concept of demand and supply, the more examples you see, the richer the understanding of the concept is. And also, there are some things you can do, like you take a concept and take another concept which comes close to this concept and try to distinguish. Let me give an example. What is the difference between simple and easy?
Simple can be seen as a structural thing, the format. Simple can be seen as a format related thing of
A format related. And easy?
and easy in that execution related, how we use the simple.
Okay. Anyone else? How do you distinguish simple and easy?
Easy is probably something which we've done earlier. So doing it again, we find it easy to do.
Okay. What is simple?
Simple means the process may not be very complicated. Even if we've done it or not done it earlier, still it's understandable.
Okay. And one very nice way to think about it is how Aryan said. Simplicity is usually around the structure. The structure is pretty basic. The structure is very elegant, and you're able to get a hang of it. But ease is more about the effort involved, right? The cognitive effort or the effort which we take to handle that structure. Now, I use this difference of simple and easy to make a point that if you're studying a concept, it might be a good idea for you to contrast this concept to other similar concepts. While trying to contrast your concept with other concepts which come close by, you're drawing sharp boundaries. If I ask you to distinguish between simple and tough, that might be a simple exercise to do, and it also might be an easy exercise to do. May not yield as much. But if you're getting another concept which comes close by, that's when the cognitive effort comes into play, and there's a rich understanding which you get from that. And another very interesting thing to do is take this concept and compare it with something which is very far away with it and try to find a similarity. What is the similarity between simple and tough?
Both are qualities
Of a process, or qualities of a task or a process, right? You get the exercise I'm telling you here. What is the exercise while learning a concept?
Try to differentiate between very close concepts or try to connect ones which are very far off. So like you're trying to define what it is and what it is not when you're trying to differentiate between very close ones. So you are refining your understanding.
Wittgenstein, the famous philosopher of language, said, without philosophy, thoughts are cloudy and indistinct. Without philosophy, thoughts are cloudy and indistinct. Cloudy, indistinct. The job of philosophy is to give the thoughts sharp and clear boundaries.
Could you repeat the person who said that?
Wittgenstein is a philosopher of language. who completely changed the way we look at language. And interestingly, he has written 2 books and both of them are very different, and he contradicted himself itself in a way. So yeah, now going back, thoughts are usually very cloudy in the sense they're not clear. We can get some clarity around the thoughts, by using philosophy. And thoughts sometimes are indistinct, as in 2 thoughts might appear very similar. But in philosophy, we try to contrast and then draw sharp boundaries around the thought to know what it is not. To not just know what it is, but to also know what it is not. A superior knowledge is to know what it is not just knowing what it is. So, 2 simple takeaways from today's session. So, one takeaway is when we build more, when we see more examples, we are, building more networks or something like that. And it's important for us to see that, do we want to force fit that concept in our mind? Or do we want our mind to organically explore, see those patterns and form those concepts? Because when we know, our mind is organically very capable of synthesizing concepts. So that's my first point. I mean, my 0th point is our mind has the capability to synthesize concepts if we give our mind the chance. My first concept is the more examples and more experiences to reflect upon, you're making the concept richer in your mind. And the second takeaway is that when you can distinguish between similar concepts, or when you can try to find some common patterns with very different concepts, I mean, all these are probably activities to build that conceptual apparatus within our mind. Because language gives us that conceptual apparatus, and I think one big difference between humans and other animals is language. Other animals do not have language. So, I mean, even if they may have some babbling sound, they may have some sounds and other things, they may have some code, but they do not have something which is as cognitively immersive as what we humans call language. Grammar and abstraction and, being able to convey such very crazy things. So if we know that this is how concepts are, in our worksheets, would we want to see plenty of examples, and also instead of directly giving away the concept, would we want to give examples and let the learner arrive at the concept rather than giving the concept away to the learner. This is pretty much what I wanted to convey today. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to stop and take them. Yeah, Aryan.
Could you explain the reasoning? Why is it so that to know what is it not is like superior than?
Because when we learn a concept, right, we believe we know it. But when we get into situations, we tend to, use the same idea in a situation where the idea doesn't hold. So the number of situations where the idea doesn't hold are usually higher than the situations where the idea holds. So what happens is, let's say you're trying to bowl in cricket and you're trying to bowl the ball in one area, and someone tells you that's a very good area to bowl, but that's a very good area to bowl in certain pitches. In other pitches, it might be a terrible ball to bowl. But if you do not know on what pitches it's a good ball to bowl, you end up bowling in areas, in pitches where it's not a good ball. You get hit like hell, and then you realize that, oh, that was a bad ball, and you give up on it. So when you know both what it is and what it is not, and more about what it is not, because the universe of what it is not is much bigger than the universe of what it is, then you can clearly see where that idea holds and where the idea doesn't hold. Because the universe outside is much bigger. And you're able to get that sharpness of the boundary when you know what it is not. You're able to earmark all the boundaries what it is not. So what is left out is what it is. Like, again, see, Aryan, being able to tell that it is this concept may be tough, but being able to tell it is not, to contradict is easy than to prove. Is this a right design? Is this not a right design? Like, if you give me a design and I say, hey, this violates the laws of design, I can contradict it. But is it a good design? I still have to check if there is some other law which I've not violated. Does that make sense? If it is false, I can directly give you a proof and say it is false. But if I do not have a proof that it is false, I'm still waiting that maybe there's something which I missed out. Much more easier to contradict than to prove, purely in logical terms. That's what Karl Popper's philosophy of science is. In science, you can prove it to be false, but you can't prove it to be true. Because tomorrow nature may contradict you. Next question. Next question, anyone?
Creating boundaries wouldn't restrict ourselves from thinking like if you want to think above those boundaries, then wouldn't it?
So we're not constraining ourselves from thinking. We're drawing a boundary of what that concept is and what that concept is not.
Okay.
Like, for example, you're talking of a concept of say demand. What is demand and what demand is not? So is demand how much people like something? No, right? Demand is how much people want something. Just because they like it, it does not mean they want it. Now you've drawn a boundary, right? If you don't draw this boundary, you might think like and want are the same. So in reality, whenever we go about taking decisions, a lot of times we falter with our decisions because the concept was not clear. We fell into a trespass area. The area which comes closer to your territory but not your territory. And you have entered the other waters which you are not allowed to enter. You're not imposing constraints on what you're allowed to think. You're only trying to draw those boundaries to understand what is that concept and what that concept is not. Next question. Anybody else has a question?
Not exactly a question, but I found this very interesting. When Pragya ma'am said ki when we compare two different, when we compare two similar things, we learn what a concept is not. So we define the concept, and when we compare two faraway things, we actually expand our understanding or deepen our understanding of the concept. So the second part was really new to me. Comparing two different things, it helps you create, a unified thing that you can include both the definitions or contradictory
Palash,
definitions.
adding to what you said, this is the opportunity for a curriculum designer. This is an opportunity for a curriculum designer in the sense that what are the opportunities I give a learner where the learner is able to synthesize the concept by doing what I ask the learner to do. Can I give reflective questions or reflective activities which aid the expansion of the concept within the learner's mind?
Exactly.
But today's session was more about being a mythbuster in terms of what is our understanding of a concept, what is our understanding of learning. So either you're looking at learning in the dimension of knowledge or you're looking at learning in the dimension of wisdom. I'm happy to take one last question if someone has a question.
May I speak?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so this is not a question, definitely just a reflection. For me, the golden line today that Tarun, you said was that the example of cricket, which I don't follow at all, but I got it. It clarified the whole discussion for me today. You may have a great technique, or you may have a great concept or an idea. You have to test it out to know where it works and where it doesn't. Otherwise, you won't even know it's a great idea. I mean, it's important to know that it works in specific situations, even to have a skill and to know it's a skill, or to know it's an idea that works in specific situations. So that was a
That to me was a side remark.
yeah.
That to me, see, look, knowing where it works, where it doesn't work might be additional understanding of the concept, might be additional knowledge of the concept, of knowing where this concept works, where this concept doesn't work. But it's a different thing in itself to even get a hang of the concept itself.
Yes.
Where does demand supply economics work? Where does demand supply economics not work? Might be a question to ask. But a more fundamental question to ask is, what is demand itself?
Yes. Yes.
I mean, one big problem with the way people learn today is people are in a tearing hurry to go and apply the concept. But it starts with first, again, Pareto's law, right? 80-20 rule. 80% of my energy goes into getting a hang of the concept. That's where philosophy plays a very important role in education of any subject. Because the layer of philosophy can help you get a hang of the concept. And once you get a hang of the concept, application or execution are just a piece of cake. But one area where a lot of industry practitioners struggle is because that concept is not very clear. It's very jarring in the head. But again, if you ask me, why is the concept not very clear? Because the concept of a concept is not clear in people's head. And why is the concept of a concept not clear? Because people operate in the factual realm, not in the conceptual realm. So when people operate in the factual realm, that becomes a handicap for life. So that's why for me as an educator, the most important thing for an educator to do is to introduce the learner to the conceptual realm. Otherwise, it's a handicap for life if the learner is stuck in the factual realm. And let me tell you, many data scientists, many so-called experts live all their life in the factual realm, blissfully ignorant of the conceptual realm. For them, any kind of mastery is just magic. They can't see a process of how to get there, outside their own domain, of course. But once one can get a hang of the conceptual realm, one would believe that given enough time, I might be able to get that mastery. At least pure cognitive mastery. Something involving your body may be tough. Maybe there could be biological constraints, but something cognitive, you might be able to acquire. Yeah, Ms. Pragya, you were saying.
No, that's fine.
Please go ahead.
I was just trying to give an example that I had in my class that, where I was teaching class 6 children or something about charge, electric charge. So some children came up as saying that charge is also meaning the amount of money that you have to pay. And another child said, but charge is also something of under your care. And so like that, they gave me many examples of charge. So I had to tell them that what this charge is and what it is not. So like that, many times in the class, you have situations where even, for example, a simple circle, when you're telling a very young child, the child may think that circle is something which is enclosed by a boundary. But then you tell him that a square is not a circle, even though it's bound by a boundary. Even an oval is not a circle. So ultimately, the young child understands that, okay, this is a circle and this oval is not a circle.
Ms. Pragya, there I have a problem again in that approach of saying this is a square, this is a circle. The way I usually prefer doing that is, I show the child multiple squares. I show the child multiple circles. And I ask, are these two families the same or are these two families different? Again, I ask, what is common to all these fellows? What is these fellows have which these fellows do not have, and so on. Then I ask, would you want to give the same name to both the families, or would you want a different name?
Yes, this is
When the name
definitely
says
a better.
different,
Yes,
say, okay, that is why we humans call them squares and we call them circles.
right.
Otherwise, it would be doctrine to say that this is a square, this is a rectangle, and so on, right?
Right.
Which is about, again, imposing an idea on a child, which every time we impose an idea, we're killing reason.
Absolutely perfect example of what you said, that allow them to find the commonality. So by showing different families, let them get the idea, common idea.
I mean, when we say it is not this, can we put them in situations through which they arrive at that conclusion rather than us telling it?
Correct.
That would be a more organic approach to learning, is what I was saying. And regarding charge as well, one interesting question which is striking my mind was, if we call both of them charge, is it possible that historically both the concepts had something in common due to which both of them acquired the same name? Would be a question I would ask.
Wonderful example of the second approach, where unrelated things could be related.
A lot of times, I mean, see, sometimes you have abuse of jargon, abuse of notation in mathematics. Abuse of notation is you use the same notation for two different things. You use the same symbol for representing two different things. While that can lead to discomfort because two things are being given the same label, sometimes that can be beautiful also. Like in language, we call it alankar. You repeat the same thing, that's an alankar, because you again, it's a pun. You can create a pun out of it. So there's a kind of aesthetics which you're bringing out. So that experience can be given to a child. When the child says that these two are the same, you say that, okay, sometimes we tend to have concepts which are different, but we tend to use the same label for both. Why? I don't know. There could be a million reasons. Our ancestors were crazy people, but their accidents can be beautiful, because sometimes when we use the same label for two different things, there can be an aesthetic which emerges from it. So that can be, again, a very nice way of handling that situation where kids are seeing that the same label is being used for two different concepts.
Yeah, maybe they can research and find out if there was something connecting the two. Great.
I mean, this was just an advertisement for philosophy. The more we study philosophy, we get aware of these grammars of concepts. We get a navigation of how can we handle concepts.
Yes.
Like two different concepts may have got the same name because historically there was a connection, and that connection is forgotten now because that context doesn't exist now. That got to know because somewhere I saw an example, right? That two things were connected, so they got the same name and then later got disconnected and so on. So philosophers tend to take interest in such patterns.
Yeah.
Because those patterns appear very aesthetic to philosophers. That's about it from today's session. So tomorrow again we'll have a discussion on philosophy of language, and the discussion on philosophy of language again is to promote a deeper understanding of conceptual clarity, and hopefully day after I'll have a discussion on philosophy of mathematics to again bring that dimension into our curriculum development. Thank you everyone for joining in. See you tomorrow.
Thank you. Wonderful session. Thank you so much.